Now, let me tell you, I think I've said this a couple of times before. Dr. Ron Ehrlich wrote a great book. It's called A Life Less Stress. Last week we talked all about the different forms of stress with Dr. Ron. Today we're going to talk about technology and an upside and a downside of technology. There's always a positive and there's always a negative, I suppose, of everything. Dr. Ron Ehrlich, good afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Brent. Good afternoon to you.
Upside, downside of technology? I don't know. I'm into tech. Are you into tech?
Well, Brent, it's a bit like my book, A Life Less Stressed. I have to remind people that for me it's aspirational. I'm trying to lead a life less stressed. I haven't worked it completely out yet. And it's when we get to technology, it's a similar thing. I love technology. But I think we're a bit like kids in a sweet shop, with technology. We just love it. We take everything. We're just filling our pockets. We just haven't quite worked out how to control it as well as we should. And at the moment, you could be excused for thinking it controls us a little bit more than we control it. So there are upsides and downsides. Yeah.
That's true. But at the moment, I suppose, with the lockdowns, we were just talking to the previous caller about lockdowns. I mean, with the lockdowns that people are experiencing in the Sydney area in New South Wales at the moment, really the only way that people can communicate is either through telephone or through technology.
Yes, and that's one of the biggest upsides, isn't it? Because whenever we've ever had a disaster or something terrible happen, we've been able to give each other a hug and collectively support each other. And here we find ourselves in isolation. So where would we be without technology? So this is a huge upside of technology, that it does connect us, and we're reminded. It's interesting though, because while we feel really lucky with the technology, we're also reminded about how much we miss the face-to-face and how important that face-to-face, seeing people, reacting to people, giving them a hug, even shaking their hand. How dangerous is that? But anyway, so it reminds us how lucky we are to have it, but it reminds us of how important it is to be connecting with people sitting right next to us, or our neighbours or our community.
The information that technology gives us, I mean, you could argue that there's too much information, could you not? I mean, it's the 24/7 news cycle, and so much information, particularly in reference to this pandemic at the moment, people are not accessing they're accessing on social media. And all of a sudden, some people take that information that they've accessed through social media to be absolute truth.
Yes, I know. Look, I mean, we're exposed to a lot of information. I heard somebody once liken it to if a tribesman was standing in the middle of the Kalahari Desert with a smartphone and had access and had connection, they would have access to more information than President Clinton had when he was sitting in the White House in the 1990s. So, we have access to a lot of information, but information does not mean knowledge. And that is our biggest challenge, converting information into knowledge and trying to access reliable information, because it's just so easy to go down a rabbit hole and for a truth to be just what it is you've just read on the internet as though it is the truth. And that's really the challenge, is to try to sort the information out too much and to find out what is reliable and what is not.
What does overload of information do to our health?
Oh, well, it divides us. I mean, I think we're seeing a very polarized society. We saw that in America. If you wanted to see technology go wrong, and still there, I think that's a really good example of how technology can cause social dislocation and polarize people in a way that is not very healthy. So there is that. I mean, that's just one aspect of it. Look, recently, Brent, I've had the pleasure of talking to a psychologist who specializes in this technological world, Jocelyn Brewer, and she works on what's called digital nutrition. And rather than detoxing and unplugging, which, let's face it, that's just not going to happen, she's more about looking at it as an intentional, intelligent use of devices, as a conscious consumption of media, news, information. And I love what Jocelyn talks about. She talks about 3 M's when we engage with technology. we should be mindful of what we are doing. It's rather than just sitting there mindlessly going down rabbit holes which technology can easily take us. It should be meaningful. Again, what are you spending all of this time doing? And the third M is moderate, to moderate our time and moderate our content. And I love the way, because this is a challenge for all of us of all ages, and I'm certainly not pretending to have sorted this out myself, as my wife would tell you, but you walk into a restaurant and you'll see a family sitting there, all on their devices. Or the other day, a few weeks ago actually, I was in a cafe and there were 6 people there sitting, young people, all I guess under 30, and they were all on their devices. So part of the problem is that while on the one hand we have the opportunity to connect with the world, we lose out on connecting with the person next to us. And we know, and we've talked about this before, Brent, that relationships are probably the best indicator of our health and well-being over a long period. The longest study that's ever done in health longevity is from Harvard Medical School. They've done a 75-year study, and they found that relationships were the best predictor of health and well-being. And that is real relationships. If you're fortunate enough to have a significant other, that's great, but it could also be your relationship with friends, with family, with clubs, with sporting clubs, with churches, with groups, whatever. But real connection is what's really important. So I think what I loved about Jocelyn's approach is that it's really important for us to be proactive when we're thinking about this personally and particularly with a family, because just telling your kids, I'll get off that technology, and then they turn around and look at you, I think we need to be proactive and really very collaborative in how we approach this. And that's part of the challenge for us all in this technological world.
We were talking to Paul Clitheroe yesterday, the financial guru, and he was talking about learning about finances from his parents, and that led to a discussion about how, we learn a lot of our habits as we grow up from our parents. But in reference to technology, maybe it's the parents that are learning the bad habits from their children, because young kids these days seem to know so much more about technology than a lot of their parents, and they spend so much time on the technology, probably more so than their parents do. So in many ways, the parents are learning the bad habit of always being connected to technology from their kids, rather than the other way around.
Oh, gee, Brent, I wish that was true. That's throwing them a pass that... I think one of the things that we have to, it's true that kids are really, they've grown up so intuitive. They don't even know a world. I mean, you and I can remember a world before there were mobile phones and computers. And it's hard to imagine, but there really was such a world. And yet for kids who have grown up, particularly since 2007, 2007 was a real turning point in technology. In 2007, the smartphone was brought on, the first iPhone. That was huge. Up until then, we thought it was pretty cool to be able to receive a telephone call and a text on a little Nokia, but receive emails, have access to Google. Google came about in 2007 as well, so did Facebook, YouTube. It was around that time that it was an explosion, and there's been an exponential growth. So kids today have just grown up thinking that they don't even think of it as technology, just think of it as life. But often we see, I see this, that parents are telling their kids to stay off the technology, and yet they are constantly on it themselves. And so the key to it is modeling, but not to do as I say, don't do as I do. I reckon this is where it's an opportunity for parents and children to sit down almost as equals and say, hey, listen, this is something we all have to work through as a family, and let's all agree on this. For example, gaming. Gaming is really a fact of life for many kids, and there's a great website called taminggaming.com where there is some really great resources there for parents to sit down and work through these issues of gaming, rather than saying, get off your devices, stop being on there, shut that down, give me your phone, all that kind of stuff. I think we just have to be a little bit more proactive and collaborative with our kids and model good behaviour for each other.
Can I ask you, what effect does technology have on our sleep? We read about this thing called, a blue light. And we're told that if we want to get a good night's sleep, to put the technology down and don't read it before we go to bed. But what effect does technology have on our sleep?
Look, it has effect. I guess you could look at it in 3 or 4 different ways. The one you've mentioned, a lot of these devices have blue light. And yes, there are filters on them nowadays, which is an acknowledgement of that problem. But that part of the electromagnetic spectrum affects our melatonin production. It's why getting out in the sun and getting the infrared and the ultraviolet light from the sun is really important in producing melatonin. It's when we move down to the blue end of the spectrum where the problem starts to arise in melatonin. So melatonin is a really important driver of our sleep. So that's one thing. The other thing is that bedrooms are for sleeping and intimacy if you are fortunate enough. But they are the 2 things that occur in a bedroom. So I think we should make a rule. We do this in our house, that all technology should be at least 2 meters away from my head, and I preferably shouldn't have a TV in my bedroom because this is no time to be connecting with the world. This is the time to be connecting with your pillow. And when you start to, putting aside the blue light now, we're talking psychologically, when you start to engage in your emails, check your news, check Facebook, check Instagram, your brain is starting to work. If it wasn't working, you wouldn't be doing it. So that is not a good thing, and you are literally psychologically wired. And the last thing is, that we are all, every atom in our body is both energy and matter. That was a guy called Einstein. And it's a pretty important concept, and our body works on little microscopic currents. So getting electromagnetic radiation away from our beds at night when we should be regenerating, rebuilding, rebooting, both physically and mentally, is really important. So I personally don't think that technology has a place in our bedroom.
Do you know, I can't remember the last time I didn't have a TV in a bedroom, Ron.
I know. And listen, when I go into a hotel, my wife and I often think, wow, this is a bit of a treat, isn't it? I mean, we've got a TV in our bedroom. But you've got to play the long game here, Brent. I mean, and the long game is life. And I think, this is about prioritising sleep. And I think maybe in a few weeks' time we can talk about sleep hygiene, and we'll revisit this again. But, I know there is something soporific. It makes you go to sleep about watching TV, or not. It depends on your programs. That's the other thing I've observed. There are certain programs that my wife and I will and won't watch. We don't have the TV in the bedroom. There's certain programs we will and won't watch, and we prefer lighter programs that don't involve violence, car chases, horror, suspense. You've got to think about that as part of good sleep hygiene. And having a TV in the bedroom, I know, is a little bit of a treat for people, but it's just not a good thing to do, I don't think.
The big thing about technology in the bedroom, my wife and I run a business. I do this, and we've also got a business. Truly, one of the first things I do, probably the first thing I do of a morning when I get up, is check my emails. And invariably it's in the bedroom, and to see what's coming overnight. Have we got any bookings from overseas? All this sort of stuff. Maybe not from overseas now, but I mean, have we got any bookings? So I'm getting to habit. It's a habit. And I was just thinking while you were talking, I was just thinking, how would I break that habit, though, of doing that? Because it's ingrained in me. I've done it for so many years now. It's one of the first things I do when I get out of bed of a morning, because it's important to me getting my day off to a good start.
Well, Brent, that's so interesting you should raise that, because apart from talking to you once a week, I also have I've got a few other things happening in my life, and I get to talk to a lot of people through my podcast. And through Jocelyn Brewer, she introduced me to this best-selling author called Nir Eyal, N-I-R, Nir Eyal, E-Y-A-L. And he's written 2 books, one called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And the flip side of that coin, he's just released another book called Indistractable, how to control your attention and choose your life. So the Hooked one is a great one for teaching you what actually goes into the products that make us hooked.
Mm-hmm.
And the Indistractable is an acknowledgement that, hey, I know I showed you in the first book how it's done, but really you need to be indistractable. And that's all about understanding the process. And what he talks about is establishing values. And the values that he focuses on are three. Firstly, yourself as an individual. What is important to you? Exercise, what you put in your mouth, how often you sleep, all that. The second part is relationships, focusing on relationships. And the third one is work, and dividing your day up a little bit more in a structured way to approach that, because 70 or 80% of people check their emails on waking up. So you're not on your own there. But we need to learn to use technology. That is our one of our biggest challenges in this modern world, because it's not going away anytime soon.
I agree 100%. Always good to talk to you, Dr. Ron. Thank you so much. We will catch up with you again next week, all right?
A pleasure. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Don. Ron. That's Dr. Ron Ehrlich.